imagine everyone on here knows who you are because they've read your book, but Najwa Zebian is an activist and author of 6 books of poetry and self-development, many of which focus on creating authentic change to help people live a life that they love. And you also host a podcast, In the Clear and Stories of the Soul.
Yes.
And you are like such a beautiful writer. And I think
Thank you.
one of my favorite parts about your writing is that not only do the things you write about feel so relatable, but it really feels like each reader, like you're talking directly to them. And I think that
Mm.
that is a real gift for people to read something and not just feel like I can understand this, I can relate to this, but to feel like you're speaking directly to them. And that is, I
Thank
think a
you.
beautiful gift that you have.
Thank you. That's always my hope with my writings is to make a person feel like I'm sitting there having a cup of coffee or tea or whatever with them, to feel like it's such an intimate conversation, like I understand what you're going
Yeah.
through. So I really appreciate that.
And I see that someone wrote in, agreeing, saying that you do have such a way with words, which I think we
Thank
can
you.
all agree with. I know that you start your podcast by asking people, who are you without
Yes.
labels? So I am going to turn that question to you before we focus on the
Yeah.
book, which I realize I didn't even mention what book we're talking about, which is your newest book, The Only Constant, and
Yes.
ask, who are you without the labels?
I am a human who is an empath who deeply cares about people and who deeply cares about the world and doing the right thing. I am somebody who is deeply sensitive about not just the way I feel, but about the way that others around me feel. I am someone who has a big heart and a lot of love to give, and someone who is really, really passionate about making the world a more fair and just place for everyone.
And I guess I'm curious, do you feel like, I mean, I think that identity comes across so much in your work, in your writing, in your podcast. Do you feel like your definition of who you are without the labels varies from day to day, or do you feel like,
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, it's a struggle because, as I wrote about in The Only Constant, I went through a period of time in my life where I was transitioning from constantly being in school or working on some kind of a deadline to now living and being and not constantly going after a milestone or an achievement. And even though on a logical level, I knew I shouldn't define myself by those achievements and those milestones and what have I done by this age, even though I knew it on a logical level, I knew that once I started living that way, I was going to feel shell shocked, like to
yeah,
wake up every morning and not have that one driving thing. Like, I need to work on that assignment. I need to work on my dissertation. I have that one big thing. I knew my body was going to be like, you're lazy. What are you doing? Because my entire life, I thought if I do more, that makes me more valuable.
yeah,
And to live in a way that I can literally tell myself, you have value because you are, not because you do. That's very hard for me to do. So there are still times when I slip back into
yeah,
old definitions of myself. And when I need to remind myself of who I am, I find myself relying on my accomplishments. And I have to snap myself back into reality and say, but you're worthy without all of that. Like, I know your entire life you worked for all of that so that you could feel worthy, but we're changing that now. Like, you know that without all of those labels, you are a beautiful human being. That's
yeah,
really, really, really difficult to do. So I want everybody who's listening to, I don't want you to think that like you hear that you are somebody without labels and all of a sudden you should just believe it wholly. Like, if it took you 30 years to develop a belief about yourself that all of your accomplishments make you who you are, it's going to take some time for you to shake that off and unlearn that and uncondition yourself from it.
yeah. And I think that that's so beautifully said. And I think that for a lot of people, even recognizing what the labels are is a huge step.
Absolutely.
And I think that largely as humans, we, most of us are hard on ourselves and hold ourselves to high expectations and are our harshest critic. And I think that just noticing that those labels exist is a big step, and like you said, it's often a constant battle of, trying to remind yourself that you're more than just those labels, and
For
maybe that
sure.
those labels that you've relied on for so much of your life don't
Yeah.
define you anymore.
Healing is an ongoing thing, and you're going to have to heal from certain things every single day, and you're going to have to heal from certain things, every few weeks. It's not a one-time thing. So as long as you become aware of the times that you find yourself relying on all your accomplishments and just kind of bring yourself back to your body and say, okay, now we're starting to find reasons to prove that we deserve respect or love or whatever it is. Remember, you don't need those reasons. You, as you are,
Yeah.
deserve that. So,
Yeah.
but I always, like with myself, I'll always say, I'll ask myself, would you look at somebody else who doesn't have all of those achievements and say, because you don't have all of that, you don't deserve respect or love or kindness? And the answer is always no. So then I'm like, then why do you feel like your worth depends on having all of those
Yeah.
things? Like, where did that come from? So it helps to do that, to remind yourself to give yourself the empathy that you would give a stranger, literally a stranger. We
Yeah.
deserve that a lot. I mean, we deserve that first and foremost before we give it to anybody else.
Yeah. And I think it's so humbling. And a question I commonly ask people in therapy is, what would you say to your best friend, your partner, a family member, a stranger, if they made that same comment? And almost inevitably, people have so much more compassion, for
Absolutely.
other people.
Yeah, because you immediately think, oh, how would that make that person feel? And because you're an empath, And the only constant, I talk quite a bit about having self-compassion.
Yeah.
And it's easier for us to understand compassion when we're talking about other people. Compassion has two elements, empathy and a willingness to help. So if you look at somebody else that's struggling, like I have a story, this happened a few months ago with a friend of mine. She was filling up her coffee machine and the lid fell out of her hand or it fell into the water or
Yeah.
something. And she immediately said, like, I'm so stupid. And I caught that and I looked at her and I was like, no. And then she teared up immediately because she understood
Yeah.
that, like, logically she knows she would never speak to herself that way, but it's like a cassette that you remember over the
Yeah.
years. So it's easier for us, like I caught that right away, but I may have spoken to myself that way if I had done something like that without even thinking. And it takes sometimes putting ourselves in our own shoes. So a self-compassionate approach is always good to not only change that internal patterning that you have, but also to change the language that you default to. Because
Yeah.
usually on good days, we're good to ourselves. But what about the bad days? What about when the weather is not as nice as
Yeah.
it is on a day that you're good to yourself? What about when something goes wrong, when you fail at something, when you get negative feedback? Those are the really crucial times. How do you handle yourself when what if somebody breaks up with you? What if somebody that you love dies? What if you have this great opportunity that you were going for that just didn't work out? It's those times that you really, really need that self-compassion to kick in. But usually what happens is what we've memorized over the years, what's wrong with you? Of course, this is going to happen to you. And who did you think you were for things to go in a better way? So we start degrading ourselves a lot more than the situation itself is trying to degrade us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think and you talk about it in the book, where our core beliefs so much come in to play, that, these beliefs that often we have subconsciously, like we're not even aware of them. We might not be saying the actual core beliefs to ourselves on a daily basis, but they perpetuate these automatic thoughts that we have often in these negative situations
absolutely. Yeah.
that, that feel so loud in our mind when things aren't going well.
Yes.
Um,
Um,
yeah, no, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say that's why I really wanted to have a chapter in there about the changes we need to make, because I think the one type of change that people struggle with so much is when change happens to you, like a change you don't choose, like somebody breaking up with you lose a job you really wanted, you wanted a program in school, it didn't work out, a friend group just excluded you, stuff like that. When things happen that you kind of have to accept. But then there's that other kind of change that's like, those are changes I genuinely need to make in my life in order to live an authentic life. And those changes are that patterning that started way back in your childhood that literally dictates how you show up for yourself and how you show up in your relationships. And I really wanted to have a chapter in there on that because I want people to know that life isn't just about, life threw a ball at you and you have to dodge it back or you have to do something with it. It's also about you deciding to get rid of certain things in your life or to change the way you see yourself and the world around you. I think it's very important to have that, inward directed reflection of, would I live my life in this way if I had 100% choice or say in it? Like, it's really important to be able to do that. And with that going inward, a lot of stuff just comes to the surface and we really don't want to deal with it because it brings up a lot of shame. But it's
Yeah.
one of those things where it's like that analogy with like a beach ball in the water. Like, you're going to keep pushing it down, but it's going to keep coming back up to the surface. And you'd better invest your energy into trying to understand it as opposed to constantly pushing it down.
Yeah, and I think one thing that comes to mind, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, is I think people often wait until they feel like they need to make a change rather than listening when they want to make the
Yes.
change. And I think often, uh, and I don't mean to simplify the difficulty that making change often, brings about, but often if you make the change at the point when you want to and not waiting until you need to, not only is it easier, but it also can feel more empowering and more freeing that you don't
Yes.
wait until you get to the point in which, and I know you advise against saying people like, I have no choice, but
Yes.
that you don't want to wait until you're telling yourself that you have no choice, that
I
it's important
used
to
to
listen.
always say that. Like, I had no other choice. I had to do that. When people would tell me, "Oh my God, that's such a brave thing that you did," I would say, "No, I had to." Like, I had no other choice. And now, as I was writing The Only Constant, I reflected on that and I was like, those are choices I made. I need to own them. I think I thought if I owned them, then I would label myself as a rebel or as somebody who's not a good person just because I'm a people pleaser by conditioning. Like,
Yeah.
I've always been a people pleaser. I never wanted anyone to judge me or to not like me or to think badly of me or to say, like, oh, she went against the grain and she's disrespecting the,
Yeah.
like, maybe some people might think I disrespected my family, my culture, my religion. And so it was always like I had to do that. It was either making that choice or me literally not being here anymore. Like, I just didn't want to be here anymore. So it was either doing that or just not being, you know? And
Yeah.
to me, it wasn't like the physical aspect of not being here anymore. It was more like I was killing my soul. That's what it felt like. So when the choice came to feeling like I was completely shriveling to the point of non-existence versus doing the thing that absolutely needed to be done. I chose to do the thing that needed to be done. And it was always, I had no choice. I had to do that. And then now I'm like, no, I made those choices. I own them. Look at me however you want to
Yeah.
look at me. Like, obviously it hurts. For the first while, it hurts to look at people who you thought would love you no matter what, and then you realize that their love for you was conditional on you
Right.
betraying yourself,
Right.
really, on you just following rules that don't put them in a position where they have to question the beliefs and the rules and whatever. And so you probably noticed in chapter 4 in The Only Constant, where I talk about changes we choose, one of the main elements of that is that you have to become a person of choice. You have to see yourself as somebody who actively chooses for yourself. that changes things for you. And you can start with the smallest things in your life. Like, notice when you go to a restaurant, do you actually take the time to look through the menu and look at what you might like, or do you look to the people around you and see what they're ordering? Like, start with very small things, what you're wearing every day, and say to yourself, what is my choice? Like, am I wearing this because I think those people will like it or their style is like that? Or am I wearing it because I feel good in
Yeah.
this? Because I like this style. How do you put your makeup on? Or what car do you drive? All that stuff. Just start prompting yourself to make choices so that when those big choices come into your life, you can say, you know what, this was a tough choice, but I made it. Like, I know that there's consequences to it. I know I probably ruffled some feathers. I know maybe I hurt some people's feelings indirectly, but always go back to your intention. If your intention is genuinely to live an authentic life and to make a life for yourself that reflects your values and your character, if some people are hurt by that, that's not your responsibility. The people who love and respect you unconditionally will look at your decisions for yourself. And even though they might be inconvenient for them, they will tell you, you know what? I'm worried about this part of your decision. I'm worried about this consequence, but I support you and I'm here for you. And I want to see you like win and succeed. And I want to see these risks that you're taking actually end up working out in your favor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So well said. I'm
Thank you.
I'm curious, compared to your other books, for people who have only read The Only Constant, who might have,
Yeah.
just learned about the beautiful gift of writing that you have, what are the similarities across your books, and what would you say makes The Only Constant
Mm.
uh, like unique among the books, or are there stark
You
differences, do you
know,
feel?
I'll give you an answer that has come to me from every person who's read my books and who's reached out to me and left a review. What brings all of my books together is the ability to put into words the most complicated emotions and thoughts that you just don't think you can put into words. And once you read it, you're like, oh my God, that's how I've been feeling. Like, the one of the top comments I get is, you put into words what I've been feeling for the last 30 years or 10
Yeah.
years. So I have the ability to just let the emotion flow onto paper. And obviously it doesn't come out of nowhere, it comes out of experience. I deeply feel what I feel, and I take so much time to contemplate and think, and you know just I observe quite a bit, and
Yeah.
I love history, and so I notice a lot of patterns, and I look at the way that, certain things happen in people's lives. And specifically when it comes to patterns, like throughout history, when you look at how manipulation works and how power works
Yeah.
and how people betray others, and loyalty goes where a person might get the most benefit, as opposed to, where the good thing is. And I've always struggled with the injustice of it, like to feel like I've invested so much in something and to expect that people are loyal to me because I am a good person and I have been loyal to them. And I feel like a lot of people struggle with that as well. So I'm able to just sit down and put that, that feeling of betrayal down on paper exactly the way that it feels. And I'm able to put down that feeling of being lied to or being abandoned. And it's not necessarily with the point of getting down to an answer, but it's more like, I want to validate the feeling that you're going through. So my very first book, Mind Platter, was like a compilation of my journal entries. And then The Nectar of Pain was about how do we turn pain into this beautiful thing. And Sparks of Phoenix was about rising from the ashes. Like, I was going through an experience where I felt like I was completely destroyed, and I recreated this really beautiful person that I I say I stitched my soul back together with gold. It really felt like that gold was, self-knowledge and self-awareness and choosing for myself. And then Welcome Home was all about building a home within. And the crazy part is I thought of Welcome Home right after my first book. And the idea stayed in my head until I
Yeah.
sat down with new agents and I told them, like, this title came to me and it said Welcome Home. And it was all about how do you build a home within yourself? And I saw rooms of forgiveness and compassion and self-love and clarity. And they were like, that's the book you need to write. And then the only constant came about, I was dealing with the change of, I'm graduating with my doctorate, I'm moving on to just living life. And at the same time, my grandma passed away, and that was a huge grief that I went through. And so I had these two big types of changes, one that happened to me and one that I chose for myself. And then they both kind of led me to think of what's the point of my life and what kind of life do I want to live? And in order to live the life I want to live, what changes do I need to make?
Yeah.
So, it's what brings my writings together is that ability to just really describe things in a very clear way and very vivid way where you feel very validated. But also, as you go through the books, you see I'm opening up a lot more and I'm being more vulnerable and I'm being more, um, just talking more about my life. And so I would say the only constant is probably the book where I talk the most about my life, my childhood trauma, how I overcame it. There's actually one story in there that probably a lot of people would like to hear. I call it the airplane story. And it was really hard for me to write about because, you know, I've written about things with my family, but not to this extent. So it was around the time that I decided to take off my hijab. And I remember just even approaching the topic with my parents was really tough for me. And my dad, like he and I, for a few months, we didn't talk. And I was really stuck on like, I really want to think about this. Do I still want to wear it? All that. And so one day my mom called me and said, come over, your dad wants to talk to you. And I was like really worried because my dad's like very stoic and I've always wanted to please him my entire life. And I think it brought up a lot of like fear and shame for me at the same time because I'm like, how do I navigate this? And then I remember going in and we were sitting at like opposite ends of the couch. And my dad is like extremely stoic, like we have one emotional moment every few years, like, and I cherish those moments so much. And I remember him saying, um, when you first told me, I was really worried about you because I thought you're at the beginning of your career, like people might look at you and say she doesn't know who she is, like she's shaky, kind of like when an airplane is taking off, it needs to be steady, like it can't have any hesitation or any kind of turbulence or else like it won't get to where it needs to get to. And then he's like, but then I thought about it even more and I was like, you're not just starting off, you're already up there in the sky, like you're not taking off anymore. And I was like, oh my God. Like I can't remember the last time I heard my dad speak
Yeah.
that way, and it made me very emotional, like extremely emotional. But to me, that was a story of, I would say, reconciliation, and at the same time, not just reconciliation with my dad, but also reconciliation within myself. Because as soon as he said that, the thing that came up inside of me was, why did I have to work so hard for a moment like this? So I could appreciate the beauty of the moment, but at the same time, I allowed myself to feel upset and a little bit resentful that it took this long for me to hear those words.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew like true healing was happening inside of me. So the only constant is super vulnerable, but in a way that encourages you to be vulnerable, not in a way that like sucks you in and says, be sad and stay here. Yeah.
And I will tell you that in reading that story, I got emotional. It was,
Aw.
I felt like I was there experiencing it. It was so beautiful. And as we're talking, I see so many people saying that they felt like they needed to discover themselves and that they found the only constant and feel like they're on that path. And people saying that they've started reading Welcome Home after feeling like the only constant changed them. I'm gonna, bring in some questions that members of the book club wrote in, if that's okay
Yes.
with you. Um, so I, one of my favorite lines, and several people wrote about it, and I've been now saying it, taking your words and saying it to several people, when people in my life feel upset about something. But someone wrote in asking if every breakdown becomes a breakthrough, and if
Mm.
not, what are ways to increase the likelihood that it will?
Mm. I don't think that every breakdown turns into a breakthrough in the sense that it's this big magical thing where you turn every bad thing that happened to you into something really good. I think every breakdown is a breakthrough in terms of you learning more about yourself and you taking an opportunity to learn a lesson, not just about yourself, but maybe about life. I think that's how you increase the possibility or probability, you make it more probable that a breakdown turns into a breakthrough is look at not only how do I end up on top of this? Don't ask that question. How do I learn something about myself or about the world around me or about people? What can I take from this that in my future experiences or relationships, I can apply this knowledge so that I don't have to go through the same breakdown?
Yeah. And how how do people know that they're ready to try to take that perspective and find the learning experience? Because I imagine that you wouldn't advise that it's something bad happens and immediately someone's thought is, okay, what learning experience do I take from this, right? It's important for
Absolutely.
people to grieve the
Yeah.
experience, to feel the emotion and not try to like turn it
Yes.
into something positive and perpetuate this toxic positivity. So
Yes.
how does one know, okay, I've felt the emotions, I can continue feeling the emotions,
Mhm.
but where is the breakthrough moment in this?
I think I think the breakthrough begins the moment you start feeling the pain of the breakdown
Yeah.
because it's all leading you to that point where things change. Like things don't change overnight. The change starts happening in a way where you might not feel like a breakthrough is happening. But if you are taking the steps that lead to the breakthrough, imagine it like a staircase. When you're still at the bottom of the staircase, you can't see that big changed um, either environment or person that you will become or where you're headed. You can't see that, and you don't see that these little steps are leading you to that place. But the breakthrough begins the moment that when a really bad thing happens or a really negative thing or something that you didn't want or something that just completely blindsided you, when you start saying, this really hurts, like, I'm really sad about this, I'm really angry about this, when you start going through the stages of grief, because you you saw in The Only Constant I talk quite a bit about grief, and grief isn't just when someone we love dies. Sometimes we grieve past versions of ourselves, and sometimes we grieve the life we thought we had with someone or with a certain job or with a certain friendship or with our family. But grief isn't just about like, oh, how do I get over this? How do I get to a point where this doesn't make me sad anymore? Grief doesn't work that way. And it comes in waves. And one day you're going to feel really upset. And the other day you're going to feel really sad and really down. And one day you're going to feel really angry. And one day you're going to try really hard to change that reality. And you're going to keep going through all of that. And one day you're going to be in denial. You're going to go through all of that to get to the point where you've reached that point of acceptance. So the breakthrough begins when you start feeling what that event caused within you. And when you take one step, your body tells you what the next step is. You just have to hold space for yourself in the same way that you would hold space for somebody else. You have to not judge yourself for having a day where you wake up and you say, I'm surviving today. That's all I'm doing. I'm just surviving. And don't judge yourself for, because I know a lot of people feel guilty when something really awful happens in their lives, and then they find themselves on a day being very happy and energetic, and then they remember that thing and they're like, oh, like I shouldn't have. Maybe they feel some kind of allegiance to the
Yeah.
pain, and they feel guilty for feeling happy. Like, you have to hold space for the happiness and for the joy and for the sadness and for the anger, but all of it is part of the breakthrough.
Yeah. And I think so I'm trained in dialectical behavior therapy. I don't know
Yeah,
like uh, people are familiar, but it's, a large proponent of the idea of radical acceptance that you speak so much about. And a big part of GBT is about leaving space for like the both and instead of the but, right?
yeah,
So that you don't, instead of saying I'm grieving but I'm getting better, and like for some people that might work, but that almost negates the first part of the statement, right? Anytime we're saying
absolutely.
but, it negates or invalidates the first part, and instead changing that framework to and can be a very
Hmm.
powerful tool to say I'm grieving and it's getting a little bit easier, and leave room for both, because one is not more important than the other, and we don't have to invalidate one statement to make another statement true, which, I think you speak so much about. Um,
Yes.
I saw someone, who's on here wrote in and asked, asking that the days that we do feel like it can be too much, you speak about how some days are going to be harder than others, but the days that it is too much, what is something that we can try and remember to get past those days?
Like I said, there are days where when it feels like it's too much, the way that I describe it in The Only Constant is grief is like a tide that pulls you in, and for a moment you feel like you're not gonna make it. Like, literally imagine you're being pulled into the water and you're like, you're panicking because you don't think that you're gonna be able to breathe again. And that's what grief feels like sometimes. And so on these really hard days where you're like, "Ah, I can't breathe, and I wish this never happened, and I don't know how to deal with this," and you feel helpless, it helps to just tell yourself, this is one of those days where I'm gonna have to prove to my body that it actually can survive this. So I'm not gonna try to push myself to feel differently or talk myself out of it. I'm gonna let the feeling pass, just like every other feeling
Yeah.
passes. I think one of the biggest struggles that comes is resistance, and I talk about this quite a bit in The Only Constant, is resistance comes in to say, let's push this away, because if we push it away, we are going to feel better. And so on those really hard days, part of why you really want to deal with it in a way that takes it away is because you don't want to deal with it. So you sit there and you struggle the entire day thinking, like, how do I ignore this? How do I distract myself? When really what needs to happen is for it to just feel, like I said, validated, like you held a space for it. Like, our survival mode tells us, if you continue feeling this way, or if you continue holding this emotion, whatever it is, or this experience, whatever it is, you're not going to survive. So, like, let's just let's resort to one of our, trauma responses. Let's freeze, or let's, which I freeze quite a bit. Like, that's my go-to
Yeah.
trauma response. I've become so aware of it. So your body will respond in these ways that make you feel like you're lazy, or make you feel like you're irrational, or something is wrong with you. But you don't need the judgment, you need the compassion. And so I used to sit there and say to myself, like, what's wrong with you? Get up. And then in conversations with my therapist and in conversations with my friends, I learned that when my body freezes, because this thing that's happening or this thing that I'm thinking about is just way too big, and I feel like I I just don't want to deal with I don't want to feel it. I just don't want to deal with it, and I don't know how to. I don't know where to start. I would go into my body, and as I'm feeling that freeze response, which sometimes I feel like I can't even move my arms, I go inwards and I say, where am I feeling something? And the moment that I start doing that, it's like my body starts giving me signals. I might feel, you know, some tension in my arms, and I start self-soothing. And all of a sudden, it's like I'm telling my body, hey, I know you're freaking out. I know you're panicking. I know this is a really big thing, but I'm here with you.
Yeah.
And it makes such a big difference to be able to do that for yourself without expecting yourself to get back up and act as normal, or, business as usual. You say to yourself, I know this is a really big thing. You're working through something huge. That's why you're so exhausted. Like, give yourself the validation that you would give to somebody else. I know that's a very complicated answer, but so is healing. So on the
Yeah.
really bad days, you absolutely need to prioritize A, telling your body you are safe in whatever it is that you're feeling, even if the feeling is so overwhelming to the point where you can't even say what it's called. You can't label it.
Yeah.
Stop trying to snap out of what your body really needs to be working through. The reason you are in this situation is that there's something that's unresolved that needs to be resolved. We are okay. We are not judging ourselves. You are not thinking, what is that person thinking of me? They think I'm lazy. They think I'm choosing this for myself. We're not going to think any of that. We can acknowledge that those are worries of ours, but we're not going to prioritize those voices over the voice that's coming from within saying, I really need you to be present
Yeah.
with me. Like, I really need you to make me feel safe. So give yourself, I'll give it in a very short answer. Give yourself the emotional safety that you so badly seek from others on the really bad days.
Yeah, and I think so much of what you said probably feeds into an answer I imagine that you would give to another question that a reader wrote in, which was whether you have any tips to avoid being hard on oneself for not living authentically earlier. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
imagine that that's the same idea of, don't be judgmental, don't be a harsh critic,
Yes,
live with compassion and praise yourself and acknowledge that the authentic living is
absolutely.
enough.
Yeah. And I have another tip for that question that just came as soon as you asked it. Would you be hard on a 7-year-old
Right.
when they're going through something like that? You wouldn't be. So every time you're hard on yourself, remember that you are talking to a little you that still hasn't resolved what they need to resolve. You're talking to a little you that had adults around them who were not safe for them, who didn't make the right decisions, who, regardless of their intentions, didn't provide that little you with the emotional safety that you needed. And now you are the adult who's responsible for that. And if you just took 2 seconds to imagine that you're not talking to 50-year-old you, you're not talking to 40-year-old you, you're not talking to 30-year-old you or 20-year-old you, you're talking to a really, really young you who is really lost and is in big need of being spoken to with the love and compassion that every little child needs.
Yeah.
So I would say that's my number one thing is on days that you're really hard on yourself, just say, would I say this to my 7-year-old self? And your answer is going to be no, 100% of the time. So say to yourself what little you needs, because that person is still here.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Um, one question that someone wrote in, and I found it interesting, is what do you do when two parts of your authentic self conflict? And as I read this question that was submitted, I found myself wondering what you would think if two parts
Mm.
of your authentic self can even conflict.
Yeah, I don't think that two parts of your authentic self can conflict. I think maybe that would happen if one authentic part is really entangled with other people or with other beliefs or things that are happening in your life where you're trying to compromise, maybe um, because your authentic selves work, your authentic parts work in harmony. But sometimes parts of us are like for people who have done internal family systems work, you know that there are parts inside of you or parts of you that sometimes are exiles that you really push away. Like you don't want to acknowledge them. Like they're part of your shadow self. There are parts of you that you're really afraid to embrace because you've been taught to see them as shameful. So you might think that part conflicts with another authentic part, but really it doesn't. It needs you to embrace it the same way that you've embraced your other authentic part. Like I'll give an example. I, for the longest time, thought dance was a very shameful thing. And I thought that if I allowed my body to move in that way or to be seen by others in that way, that that must mean something really bad about me. So there was an authentic part of me that was playful, that was joyful, that enjoyed music and enjoyed movement. But I always thought that can't be me. Like if I'm gonna be that, then I can't be this other authentic part, which is a good person and a good woman, and I'm respectful and I'm modest and whatever. So it's not that these two authentic parts were in conflict because, one must be authentic and the other must be inauthentic for them to be
Yeah.
in conflict, but it was more like I was pushing this authentic part aside and really not wanting to embrace that it's okay to be this way and this way at the same time. So when that happens, just ask yourself that question is, are they really in conflict, or does one of them require more radical acceptance on your part?
Yeah. And you talked about people pleasing. Someone wrote in asking whether people pleasing or doing for others can ever be something that people authentically enjoy, or do we just tell ourselves that we enjoy it to give ourselves an excuse to engage in it?
I think giving is definitely something that you can enjoy and revel in and say, I'm a giver. I'm somebody who enjoys seeing other people being happy. There's nothing negative about being a giver. People pleasing comes with an attached meaning of I am abandoning myself to make someone else
Yeah.
happy. Or I am not even asking myself how I feel about offering this thing to another person. I'm only thinking about how they're going to feel. So you might feel like, yeah, I used to say this thing all the time where I'm like, I'm just like that. Like, that's just who I am. And then I learned with time that giving without boundaries or without asking, am I getting the same thing in return? It's not about it being reciprocal. It's just, is the person who I'm giving this much to somebody who has shown me over time that they deserve this continual um, giving on my part, not just of things, but of my time, of my energy, of my love. Like, is this person that I'm watering me back in some way? And if the answer is always no, because it's just a unidirectional thing where it's like I'm constantly giving because I want to make them happy, and I worry that if I stop the giving then they won't like me anymore. I think the enjoyment you feel in giving is because you get this false feeling of they want me in their life or they accept me or they love me, but somebody who wants you and accepts you and loves you doesn't condition that on you giving and sacrificing yourself. So I would ask that person to really go inward and see, how do you feel when you fall into people pleasing? Like how does your body feel? Because you know deep down if this is an act of self-love or it's an act of self-betrayal. Like deep down, you know whether you're giving because you love giving and that's just who you are and you have absolutely no expectation in return versus I'm doing this because on some level, I hope that they will see me differently, love me differently, give me something in return. And I think true enjoyment comes when it's reciprocal in some way and when you know that if you're not able to give or if for some reason you decided not to at some point, that's not going to affect the way that that person feels about you because they didn't base their love for you or their respect for you on what you had to offer them.
Yeah. And I think too, like one question that I often advise that people ask themselves is, does the gratification that you get from giving or doing for others occur at the moment that you're giving or at the moment that you get some kind of reaction or response? And I think that often when
Yes.
it's happening at the moment that you're doing the act, regardless of the response, that is
Yeah.
something that you might authentically like. But when it's contingent on, is this person going to thank me? Is this person going to tell me they love me? Is this person going to reach out more? That's when it becomes a betrayal of oneself.
Yes. And I also caution people against because there's this narrative that says if you do that, like if you are a
Yeah.
people pleaser because somehow you're hoping for something in return, that's manipulation. No, it's not. I really want to correct that for
Yeah.
people because you always have to ask yourself about your intention. Is
Yeah.
your intention to manipulate someone, or is it, I just want to be loved? I
Yeah.
just want to be cared for. So don't fall for that villainization of what it means to be a people pleaser. Stop looking at the outside and go inward and see what do you think about this people pleasing behavior? Because I always say, and the only constant, I repeated this more than once, if you want to change something in your life, let's say you want to change this people pleasing pattern. If you fuel it by shame, by telling yourself, oh, I'm a manipulative person and I'm this and I'm that, then to keep yourself from being a people pleaser, you're going to continue talking to yourself that way. You're going to continue saying to yourself all these mean things. What is fueled by shame is sustained by shame, and what is fueled by self compassion is sustained by self compassion. We want change that is fueled and sustained by compassion because how many things in your life have you tried to change, hoping that once you get to the other side, you're going to feel better? And then you get to the other side and you're like, I still feel the same way about myself. Well, it's because you started leading that by hating yourself, by saying, if I can put this past version of me in the past and I can get to a brand new one where I look different and I act different and I speak different, then I'll be better. And it's like that, that version of you is still waiting for you to validate why it was the way that it was and why it was feeling the way it was feeling. The people pleasing version of you is waiting for you to sit with it and say, I know all you want is to be loved. I know all you want is for someone to care about you the way you care about them. I know what you want is for someone to show up for you the same way you show up for other people. I know where that's coming from. Here's what we have to change about that belief. And here is what we have to change about our behavior. We've learned that love and respect and kindness and all these good things are things that we have to prove we deserve by overly giving and overly sharing. We want to change that belief. So I'll hold your hand as we do this and like look at how beautiful that approach is as opposed to
Yeah.
what's wrong with you? Like we don't want to be that way anymore, right?
Yeah, and I think it's tough because the idea to some degree of being a people pleaser, being giving or selfless, like it's this idea that society often um, idealizes in a way, right? I think people get a lot of praise for putting others before themselves and living to make people happy, right? These are things that a lot of people look at as a good thing
Mm-hmm.
when others are doing it, and that probably perpetuates this desire for people to engage in those behaviors because they see people praising those behaviors. And I think that like the moment you realize that that's not going to get you what you want or what you yearn for or what you feel like you're missing in your life can be really empowering. And then it helps people realize that I, I don't know. I think that the moment you recognize what it is that you're looking for and
Yeah,
what your intention is, it can be so freeing and can help give you a sense of direction of where you can get that. And often it's getting it from within and not looking for this external validation.
you froze a
Oh,
little bit, but you're back now.
okay. I
I was
I
just
was
gonna
just,
say,
saying that it can be so freeing to realize that you don't have to look for any kind of external validation to be getting what it is that you're looking for, that you can get it from within instead.
absolutely. I think like I used to fall for that too. I would see people talk about people who sacrificed themselves and who were always available, and they would like regard them so highly. And I was that. Like I was somebody who would never say no if anybody asked me for help. Even though I might have a billion things to do,
Yeah.
I would still do that what they wanted me to. And I used to think it was a noble thing to be someone that people could always rely on. And then I realized that's not a noble thing. That's a very, very self-sacrificial thing. And it's a very self-abandoning thing. And I quickly understood that a lot of the times the people who train us to work for that validation of theirs through our constant self-abandonment and betrayal are not people who care for us. They're people who think of their best interest. So just like they're asking what is in their best interest, you also have to ask yourself what's in my best interest and start doing it. And it is going to be so uncomfortable to start saying no. It's going to be so uncomfortable to start showing up differently and not always giving off that energy of I'm always forgiving and nothing ever upsets me and I'm just really kind. Have a backbone. Have that backbone of self-respect and of confidence enough to say, you know what? That behavior was really disrespectful and I'm not okay with that. Like, why would you think that you could actually speak to me that way? Or why would you think that you could expect something like that from me, even though I have so much on my plate? There's nothing wrong with speaking to people that way,
Yeah.
but it's going to be uncomfortable to start doing that.
Yeah. And I think it's important too to note that the change doesn't happen overnight and doesn't have to, you know, happen all at once. That starting with one person or one situation and growing from that is a totally viable way to be doing it, because like you said, it is uncomfortable and it is scary, and the change can be incremental but can be so rewarding
Yes.
and like so important.
Like I said, start with little
Yeah.
things where it's not such a big, scary thing. Start with saying no to little things, and then it becomes easier as you approach a big no to say to yourself, you know what? I know I'm going to struggle with this. It's going to be tough. Let me make sure that I have a supportive person who I'm able to call right after I say no, or let me make sure I have somebody sitting next to me when I'm going to do it so that I could have that strong support system around me. Like you'll be better equipped to know how to handle those big, scary
Yes.
moments.
And, as we've been talking, so many people, again, have been writing and saying that they feel freed by you, that they feel like no one has
Yay.
ever understood them as much. We so appreciate you
Of
coming and speaking
course.
to the book club. It is so special to have, um, you know, someone with such beautiful writing and powerful messages.
Thank
For people
you.
who have read your books and listened to your podcast, where else can they consume the wisdom that you so generously give people?
You can find me on all social media platforms. I post lots of videos. I've been sick this last while. I've had issues with my breathing, so I haven't been putting out too much new content, but I usually do. And make sure you read The Only Constant. Every single one of my books has an audiobook, and I'm the one who narrates it. And it's the same thing with The Only Constant. just go and listen, read. I mean, my biggest thing that I've put out into the world are my books. So I would definitely recommend that you do that. Somebody said, what if it's your family? So I just
Yeah.
very quickly want to say, I talk a lot about family and the only constant and welcome home because I do believe that they form such a big part of how we perceive ourselves, not only in isolation, but in relation to others. They affect the way that we show up in our friendships, in our romantic relationships, in our work relationships. And I always say, we think it's more difficult to hold family members accountable because it's family and it's like no matter what, we stick together. And I talk about this concept in The Only Constant of unconditional loyalty, which we learned in our family systems. Like so many of us learn that it doesn't matter what a person does, you're still going to be loyal to them. So I always say, if you believe that family is so important and it's the reason why I can't speak up and I can't say no and blah 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 because it's family, then shouldn't they be the number one person or people who treat you exactly the way you deserve to be treated? And shouldn't they be the people who build you up and who want what's in your best interest? Like, if family is so important, what's the reason it's so important? They have a responsibility to want what is in your best interest. And if they don't, then you have every right to say, I'm not okay with that. So reevaluate why it is that family is so important. And once you're able to reevaluate that for yourself, then it eases the pain of a bond that you have to break or a bond that you have to alter a little bit. Say, I'm not going to see you every day, or I'm not going to talk to you every day, but maybe once a week or every few weeks. You'll start learning that family isn't just because we came into this life through them, but it's also through action.
Yeah.
So start applying the same rules you apply to other relationships. I hope that helps. And yeah, like I said, The Only Constant is the one book that I want everybody to read right now. And if you're not able to, just scroll through any of my social media or listen to my podcast in The Clear or Stories of the Soul, and you'll find so much. So I hope everybody enjoyed this. I certainly did.
Thank you so much again. It has been such a pleasure. And I just saw someone ask about the book club. And if you want to join the book club or see past discussions or rewatch this wonderful conversation, you can look at my Instagram page. There's a link to sign up for emails about the book club or details about it there. Thank you so much again for coming to speak with us and for all that
Of
you do for
course.
everyone.
Thank you. And thank everybody who asked questions and everybody who said hello and everybody who listened. Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful
You
night.
too.
Bye bye.
Bye.